The Queensland coalfields, one of the world's richest energy resources and, for 150 years, an industrial battleground.
No coal miner was ever handed anything. He had to fight for it. Go on strike. Whatever he got, he had to fight for.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have got anything. And if they had a rally or anything, the women were all there with them.
You know, that whole Coal Mining Act is written in blood. We've had a lot of deaths, and that's not counting the amount of people being smashed up.
Where you work 8-hour shifts, you went to work, you done your work, you went home. Not now.
What the mining companies are now doing with the destruction of the towns is they are mining the soul out of communities.
They know the militancy and the history of those mining communities when they were residential towns, and they're trying to destroy that.
If you're a good boxer, you drop your guard, someone's going to punch you, ain't they? You can't drop your guard.
This is the story of the Queensland mine workers, a story of struggle and tragedy, and the battle for a fair go. It is a story written in blood. In search of their family's past, Greg James and his daughters, Kim and Jo, are travelling through outback Queensland. They're headed to remote Mount Mulligan, a long-deserted mining town in far north Queensland.
Are you nervous coming back here, Dad?
No, I'm really looking forward to this. First time in a long time.
I'm just glad we finally got here.
Greg hasn't been back here since he left as a boy in the 1950s. In 1921, Mount Mulligan was the site of Queensland's worst mining disaster. The disaster claimed the lives of Greg's uncle and grandfather. Today, there is little left of this remote and once tight-knit community.
You could almost say it was like one big family. Because if you had a wedding, the whole town went to it. And the miners' picnic, everyone went to it.
Everybody looked after everybody, you know. Anyone had any trouble, they were all there helping.
And most of them had large families, you know. But it was a friendly town, just like any ordinary Australian, you know, coal mining small town. The mine itself, you went up the hill, right up on the top into the mountain itself, and you went in and you went down into the mountain.
On the morning of September the 19th, 1921, 75 men had just started work underground. Shortly afterward, a massive explosion rocked the town. In an instant, the men of Mount Mulligan were virtually wiped out.
There was a dust explosion, one of the worst you can get. It blew the mine and it took 2 out of the family.
Going back to Mount Mulligan and seeing how close the community lived to the tunnel mouth, you would know what happened and you would know that there would be no escaping death.
And Grandad's brother and father were killed. How old would
15.
his brother have been?
15.
15, working in the mines. Yeah. So a lot of families would have been affected with not only husbands but sons and cousins.
Yeah. Brothers,
yeah.
When the undertaker finally arrived, there were only 6 coffins for 75 bodies. The rest were made at the tunnel mouth.
Yes, I can know where it's come down here. Push flowers on with Mum.
I think the family's got a little bit of money, and Dad's grandmother decided that in honour of her husband and son, she would use that money to put a headstone on their grave.
He was 17, there you are. 17, not 16, nothing. And they were identified by personal objects in their pocket. These fellas.
And Grandad's watch that we got.
Yeah.
Have you've still got that?
I got me in pocket.
Can I have a look at it?
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
He had that on him the day of the disaster, and the watch smashed on the time that explosion happened. I'd never seen it before, and Jo and I were, we were very shocked.
That's amazing, isn't it? Really, to think that...
Nearly every miner, I was surprised, nearly every miner had one of those.
I mean, a lot changed because of this disaster, Dad, didn't it? The safety and
Some good laws were written up over this Australia.
Just because of this?
How to handle dynamite, explosives, how to handle dust, gas.
The scale of the disaster shocked the nation, and messages of sympathy poured in from across the Commonwealth.
It reverberated along Whitehall and the corridors of power, and it reverberated into Buckingham Palace, and the King sent a message of condolences. Winston Churchill, then a relatively young politician, sent messages of condolences.
The inquiry revealed blatant disregard for mine safety. Union pressure eventually resulted in new coal mine regulations.
It was such a long time ago, but it happened, and it happened to real people, and it's important to our family because that's our history and that's our roots. You know that that's your grandfather and your family. Yeah, it's really sad. The devastation that Mount Mulligan would have felt after that explosion is, I can't comprehend what that town would have went through. It wiped out 3/4 of the male population in an instant.
Mount Mulligan was little more than an outpost of the Queensland coal industry. Its heart was 1,500 kilometres south, near Brisbane, in Ipswich. As a source of energy, Ipswich's early coalfields powered Queensland's development.
People who owned them had been miners themselves and decided to try and get a coal mine going. And these little coal mines popped up.
Times there would have been probably 12 or 15 mines in Ipswich and down at Redbank, and then up in Rosewood there was quite a few mines up in there.
The migrant miners who came, many of them from Wales and Scotland, came to the West Moreton to find a better life for themselves and their families. And ironically, sadly, they came to conditions that were often no better than the mines in central Scotland or northern England or southern Wales.
94-year-old Digger Murphy was just 15 when he started work on the Ipswich field in 1935. After being elected Lodge chairman at just 17, he would eventually become president of the Queensland Miners' Union. Digger was no stranger to poverty on the coalfields.
Out you see behind me there, it's about the same type of thing that we lived in when we were young people and grew up in. Up in Collinsville, the only difference there was the houses were built of galvanised iron because the white ants ate any timber that you put up there as quick as you put it up. Our first housing up there was a bag humpy out in the bush, and it was made of bush timber frame with flour bags or corn bags opened out and sewn together. They were the walls of the house. We certainly didn't have any luxuries in those days, but we had a happy family life. That was the main thing.
Sporadic work and low wages forced many families to live in humpies.
Square about as big as this here, you know, just built out of tar paper.
Once you're used to it, there's nothing that... say bag humpies, as though they were coated with concrete, hand-played floors, pine boxes for chairs and all that.
In stark contrast, the coal barons lived like British aristocracy.
There was a British-owned company, and they had quite a few small mines working in and around the Howard area. And its CEO, the senior executive, was actually Colonel Rankin. And Colonel Rankin was a colonel in the Indian Army. And this great mansion was built on the hill, and all of the mine workers were all built around it. The centre point was this great mansion. Dad used to tell me a story about all the town would be in the movie, and down would come the coach and 8 with Colonel Rankin and his family in it, and the red carpet would be rolled out down the hallway, and then Colonel Rankin would come in, and all the children would say, "And God save Colonel Rankin for giving my daddy a job."
Steeped in a culture of masters and servants, the coal barons exploited the lack of an effective union.
By the late 1870s, in response to the conditions on the Ipswich field, associations of miners were being formed. They were essentially cooperatives and self-help groups. And it took more than 30 years for these state organisations to come together in the form of the National Union for Miners in 1915. It's easy to assume that the presence of the union immediately ensured vast changes in working conditions and pay and security. The truth is that during the 1920s and into the 1940s, most coal mining in Queensland was done by traditional unmechanised hand hewing methods.
In those days, we were filling 1,000 weight skips, wheeling them on wooden rails. Ventilation was always poor, and we were paid by the tonne. I think the tonnage rate was around about 4 shillings a tonne.
Well, pick and shovel mine, we never had any horses and never had no machines. We had to supply our own clothes, our own picks and shovels, you know.
We had no holiday pay, we had no sick pay, we had no long service leave, nothing of that character.
When I was there, we had electric boards even, you had to push them in. In them days, the old fellas was belting them in and turning them by hand. My old man, I wouldn't have started in the mine if I had to work like they were working. And they had a 3-foot seam. How'd you be in a 3-foot seam working? They used to lay down to get and shovel into these little skips.
You can imagine what if you're working in 3'6", he could never stand up. And it was a mongrel thing, you'd have no skin left on your back.
You got a low roof, you know, and you go over in a low part somewhere, and if you've got your hands on the top like that, riding the bumper bars, which you shouldn't do, but 9 out of 10 fellas, they did because you're young and bulletproof. And it's quite easy to lose a hand or a few fingers or something like that, yeah.
I saw a bloke one day going to rake a piece of coal away from where the conveyor belt come around. He had a hammer in his hand and he went to push a piece of coal away, and the belt picked up his hand, his arm, and tore his arm almost off, you know. And you could hear him screaming like an animal.
Well, all you worked in was just a pair of shorts. Some of us just worked in underpants because you just sweated like anything all day.
I, myself personally, and this is no joke, worked in nothing but my wife's mother's underpants, what do you call them, undies?
It used to get very hot, and they would work in little silk pants. They used to get them, and that's what the miners did, because they didn't chafe.
And you'd be sweating and be running out, sweat would be running out of your shoes. Or there was no fat ones, people around in those days, they all sweated off you.
You'd be very lucky if a pair of boots lasted you 6 months. The water, it'd wear the studs out of your boots.
Despite the conditions, Queensland miners maximised production throughout the Second World War.
The miners reached a tacit agreement with the employers and the government that for the duration of hostilities, they would suspend industrial action, they would suspend any industrial campaigns. The understanding was that a whole regime of pay and conditions would be renegotiated. After the war was over, nothing happened. Nothing happened in 1945, or 1946, or 1947, or 1948. In 1949, the miners had had enough.
The Miners' Federation launched a national strike in 1949 that brought the nation to a standstill.
Prime Minister Chipley ordered the use of troops in the mines.
The Chipley government decided to put troops into the coal mines to break the strike, and obviously they felt betrayed because of the promises made prior to that, and then that this was thrust on us.
It was a Labour government that savagely rounded on the miners. It branded them as communists who were intent on taking over government.
Commonwealth and State Security Police swooped on Communist Party headquarters.
What Chifley did was unconscionable. He prosecuted and saw the jailing of miners' union officials. These were people whose only desire was to represent the interests of their members. They weren't firebrand revolutionaries.
In a climate of red baiting and Cold War hysteria, the strike collapsed after 7 weeks.
I felt very bitter, particularly towards the Labor Party at that time, and particularly to Ben Chifley, who was supposed to be one of the leading lights, was supposed to be one of the people who was going to emancipate the workers in Australia.
It would be easy to suggest that the miners were completely defeated. They took a hammering, but they weren't completely defeated. They came out of it with improved conditions, particularly in relation to working hours and long service leave. But it has to be remembered too that the precedent for this, if you like, had been set by another blue-collar benefit decision in 1941, when the miners negotiated a pension scheme. And the pension scheme for miners subsequently filtered through the entire Australian workforce.
The 1950s saw rationalisation of the Queensland coal industry. Small mines gave way to large-scale operations. In 1957, the notorious Mount Mulligan mine closed. The miners were transferred to the Collinsville State Mine. Like Mulligan, Collinsville was remote and tight-knit. Miners worked at the State Mine or the neighbouring Scottville Mine.
When I started when I was 15, they said, well, where you been working for 2 years? You're too old for apprenticeship.
Greg, along with workmates Doug and Ron, are paying a visit to their old worksite.
And as an electrician was grade 10 or something.
See, they used to walk up that track there, up to the old bathrooms there, through the deputy cabin.
Yeah.
Old Darby used to give the lights out.
We used to go on strike and end up getting 35 hours a week, and now they...
Yeah.
Well, we went on strike for 8 weeks. A big group of us had to walk to work for 5 weeks because we couldn't afford petrol. Hey.
Oh, yeah.
8 weeks. And then we got our bonus, £5 a week for nothing. We were saying, gee, that was marvellous money for nothing, a bonus.
We had a lot of good union leaders go from here. Young Smythe and them that are still in it now came up through here. It was always known as a union town. Always.
Forged by isolation and primitive conditions, Collinsville had a strong tradition of solidarity.
I had very, very experienced coal miners, very strict unionists, and notoriously one of the roughest union towns in Australia.
Collinsville became a Union stronghold.
Collinsville is southwest of Townsville in North Queensland. This is the place that the newspapers called Little Moscow.
They used to call it a communist town, and that, but they were good unionists, and they liked to fight, They liked to battle, yeah.
Because they were the leaders in the fight for rights for workers, And if you start doing that, first thing the opposition did, they'd say, oh, don't listen to them bloody commos, Excuse my French.
While the press tried to paint the town red, underground there were more serious issues. The presence of gas and the introduction of new machinery would prove to be a deadly combination. The rapid extraction of coal would come at an awful price.
There's 3 flammable gases underground, you'll find underground, but methane being the most dangerous one because it's most readily ignitable. With methane, because it's so light, you can only find it up around the roof. So you'll see old pictures of deputies holding their lamps up towards the roof to see if they can get a recognition of the methane or any presence.
So in the mine where we were, when they come to a section where they knew the gas was starting to run, little bits coming out now, they would get the boys to drill nearly 100 feet in front of them, cut 3 or 4 holes to drain the gas.
The miners' worst fears were soon realised. On October the 13th, 1954, Sugar Brunker was working underground when an outburst filled the mine with gas.
Me and me mate, Jack Thomas, we were with the horses. And I just took the horse on when I heard "Run for your lives." And that's when we took off. And they had big doors for the air. I never opened one of them. They must have blew open with the pressure. It looked like ash when I was running, I went up to see the deputy, and the deputy, I said, there's an explosion down there, and the 2 deputies that were up there grabbed the light and raced straight down. And one of the fellas that run down, one of the deputies died. The gas hit him, and the other fella must have put his light up and checked and backed out of it, you know, because you can't smell it or nothing. Gas, it just hits you. The gas come up, see? And there was men up above me that heard the noise, and they were coming out to see what happened, and the gas just hit them and they just dropped where they were.
Collinsville miner Merv McCarthy lost 7 of his mates in the disaster.
If you were in the place where the gas was, once you got out of there, you drown in your own blood. That's how you die in that, with that outburst of gas.
They had the safety men then put on them suits and went down to drag them out. And we took the men up on the belt and run them up to the tunnel mouth. And then we were there for a while, and all the town heard it because they blew the whistle at the boilers that something happened at the pit. So the people just waiting there to see what was happening.
The fella who died, the shot fire on shift, Henry Peterson, Pike he was known as, he won £100 in the casket that day. He always called in to see his mother on the road to work, but he didn't call in this day because he's run late.
Well, if she'd have run into him, Pike wouldn't have been at work. He'd have been down drinking the terps. He'd have been down on the grog. He'd have never went to work, so that was just bad luck.
My father was killed in Collinsville when the 7 that outburst was there. Mum was 6 months pregnant with me, or not even 6 months. That happened in the 13th of October, and I was born the 16th of April, so I was, never ever seen my dad or nothing like that, so. Yeah, I get really sentimental about that sort of shit, so, yeah.
Nearly everyone that was in Collinsville was at the funeral because it was a small town, close to 2,000, I suppose.
The disaster left deep scars in the community and across the Queensland coal industry. It was the worst disaster since Mount Mulligan. Accusations of a cover-up followed as the government abandoned the warden's inquiry and set up a royal commission without any union representation. The commission concluded that the outburst was little more than a freak accident of nature and no fault of management. The union called it a whitewash.
The state government in their wisdom blamed the whole unionists and workers, you know what they're like. That you could have it written in blood and stone, they'd still blame you, the state government. You can't beat them.
We got jack shit. I got $130, mate, when I was turned 21. That's what I got. And some of that being £100 that my dad won the day that he got killed.
Small town like that, 7 of them went in that hit.
It would not be the last disaster on the Queensland coalfields.
Another fresh team would go down for the afternoon shift, yeah. When the mine was working down there used to be 18 horses go down every morning. They had to be down the mine for when the men started at 8 o'clock.
The horse drew this one.
Yeah, that's where the horses are back in here.
Just like a sulky, that's the way they go.
Yeah, the horses are in here. Like that.
Get up.
Hook onto their collar on those hooks, and away they go.
You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. But those horses could see. I don't know. Yeah. Used to it, just plodding along. You hold their tail, see? It was really good because it was like that up for a mile or more. You trotted behind the horse, holding the tail, and someone hold your belt, and someone hold his belt. And that's how you come out. The lucky one rode the horse illegally. Yes, it was a good setup.
I tell you, the intelligence of these horses. You'd go down, big shaft down like that, and then they'd go off onto different areas where each miner worked, I could never work out how them horses knew where to go and when to stop at the air doors.
There was one old mare here used to work on pit bottoms. I think they used to put 8 skips on her, and she'd pull them into the cage, and you'd unhook them, push them in. And they put 9 on it, she wouldn't move it. She was a good unionist too.
Well, they had a heap of horses they had to get rid of, without telling anyone, they sold a big heap of them. And before we knew where they went to the knackery, we believe. So the union said, we're going to do it again. So they made them official members of the union and gave them a union card each. No one could get rid of those boys. You sack us, you sack the horses. It worked. We saved those horses, and the local boys, I think, still got some of them, just looking after them in retirement. I thought it was a lovely gesture, making them members of a union.
By the end of the 1950s, the era of horses and pick and shovel work was largely over. Machinery increased output dramatically.
You had the mine and you had a miner driver, and he sort of run this big machine, this thundering great machine in, and it just zoop, and it stripped the coal down, and then its crab-like arms on the bottom, sent it up a little conveyor, and emptied in the back into the what they call shuttle car.
And when I went to Mara, it's the first time I'd seen machinery in action, underground machinery, and I couldn't believe there in 1 minute there was bailed out what would take us all day to shovel.
We used to get 8 tonne per car. They probably, one man probably got 8 tonne a day, if he was lucky. And on a good day we get 140 cars, which is a lot of cars, 8 tonne a car, 9 tonne a car. So that's producing coal.
Queensland's mechanised mines now seemed a world away from the dangerous pick and shovel days. But despite the advances in mining technology, the 1970s would be as dangerous as ever. The newly opened Box Flat mine in Ipswich was considered one of the most modern.
They used to call Box Flat God's mine, and it was, you could say, the top mine in Ipswich. And a lot of people thought that nothing could happen at that mine.
Underground fires were a growing threat on Queensland's coalfields. At Box Flat, shortly after midnight on July the 31st, 1972, management sent 14 men below to fight a fire. At 2:47 a.m., Ipswich was rocked by a massive explosion.
Something woke us. Sounded like some sort of a bang, and actually the house trembled. And I said to Joyce, "There's been a mine explosion."
I remember looking up and seeing the whole tunnel was just a mass of flames.
And when it exploded, it went out over the powerhouse just like a big orange and black thundercloud.
I remember sliding down the wall in the bathroom, grabbing for my helmet. I was going down head first.
And I was standing off the tunnel mouth. I looked over in the paddock and the paddock was on fire.
Everything was still falling, big gantries like timber, steel, and I could hear the bloke screaming. The side of the deputy's cabin, top of the tunnel, had blown in and Johnny was lying underneath it.
Clary Kowalski was under the corner of a wall. Johnny Halls was in under the rafters, and Merv Jensen was staggering about.
Oh, someone was screaming out on the road, that's right. It was old Merv Jensen, the old super, lying in the middle of the road with a brick in his head sideways. I can still see it. And Battery said, "Well, it's your bloody turn this time, Waldo. I'll hold him, you pull it out."
And we didn't realise at that stage that the fellas over in the belt tunnel over the road, they were blown to pieces. And we were only concerned about number 7.
When she blew, we got bits of bodies in the lake. They were picking up with the scoop and picking up. And I think the least said about that, the better.
It is believed they are actually in the process of coming above when the blast occurred, burying these 14 below and instantly killing 3 men who were standing at the mouth of number 5 shaft.
When I got out there, everybody was standing around in a shocked state. Well, naturally, I was shocked myself. What we learned later on, of course, was that there were 17 men down below. There was no chance of them, of course, surviving that.
And I ended up at the bloody hospital. My chest was bleeding. And I bumped into my old mate, Wally Butterfield. I don't know who said it, but, well, we're not doing any bloody use here. We might as well get back to the pit and get our mates out. because that's what we had in mind then, you know.
They wouldn't allow any men underground. So they got the dozers in. And sealed the tunnels. And we had a service on while this was going on.
And we gather now, O Lord, that we might pay our respects, that we might pay our tribute, that we might remember their families.
It was probably a roaring fire down there, and the only way to stop the fire and stop another explosion would be to seal it off at the tunnel mouths and stop any air and oxygen going down there, and it would smother it out.
They heard it in the Ipswich area. They were all very much shocked by the happening that took place there, and it was a very sad city at that particular time. It just about affects everybody because everybody feels like a family that we've lost a member.
I don't know how many funerals in a week. There was a lot of people there.
For the men of Box Flat, the memories are still vivid.
This is where I ended up here. The blokes were coming in and out of here. You know, it just happened. I was sliding down the wall there, and I grabbed them for my helmet. This is what happened that night. The scars there, and a couple of little ones over here. Well, it hasn't changed much. It's a bit grubby, but you can still imagine everything in the showers.
The inquiry found that the dangers presented by the fire had not been properly considered. Stone dusting regulations had also not been complied with. In future, it was recommended that all personnel should be immediately withdrawn from such hazardous environments.
Men should not be down there trying to save the mine, because it's different if there's men trapped down there, but just to save the mine, it's not worth anybody's life just to save the mine.
I know it was caused by a spontaneous combustion of coal, got out of hand, a large fire developed and it generated into an explosion. That was the first of the big disasters that I can remember. You know, we sort of knew about Mount Mulligan, but we didn't experience it. We heard older people telling us. We heard the experience of Collinsville, but Box Flat was the one that really rocked the Queensland industry, and also the Ipswich coalfield.
The disaster brought an end to the Box Flat coal mine. It also signalled the end of the wider Ipswich coalfield. Further north, vast coal reserves had been discovered on the Bowen Basin in central Queensland.
Extensive drilling programs in the Bowen Basin have revealed enough coal to justify the investment of hundreds of millions of dollars in new open-cut mines, new railways to the coast, and shiploading facilities.
Global mining companies rushed in to stake their claim. Across the vast Bowen Basin, new mines and mining towns soon dotted the landscape. The first mine opened at Moura in 1962, an outback whistle stop 160 kilometres from Rockhampton.
The first mine opened up in the Bowen Basin was Kayanga, owned by Thies Brothers. They had an open cut. For the single men, they had a bit of a shed built out at the mine site.
Reminiscent of the early days, little thought was given to the needs of mining families.
The company supplied them with tents, but they also bloody charged them for the tents. They didn't get it for nothing.
They couldn't get a house or anything like that, or if they lucky enough to have a caravan, they stayed in the caravan.
When Dad first took us up there, we lived on the riverbank of the Dawson River in caravans and tents. Very hard. And we had to shower down underneath the weir under the rapids, the water coming over the bridge, take our towel and soap and everything down and have a shower down there.
When we first came to Mara, there was a tent city at the gates of the mine. And so a few of them had moved out to the river, were camped on the riverbank. So my father decided, yeah, okay, that's not too bad, you know, you're out of the way and nice, quiet, beautiful environment for the kids, yeah. So we moved out there and we were living in a tent.
We had kerosene drums as chairs and had a table that made myself out of an old door.
And it was then that the union decided we've got to take a stand.
So we had to show those arseholes what the Aussie miners were like, so we hit them with a 7-week strike.
Strikes and union pressure brought about a government inquiry.
My father ran that case before the Coal Industry Tribunal. Justice Gallagher went to Billawheeler and Mara to conduct inspections. Some of the women who were forced to live in those appalling conditions bought bottles of the water out of the river and said, this is what we bathe in, this is what we drink in, this is what we provide our children. Gallagher was appalled by it, and when he questioned the head of Peabody at the time, the response famously, and it's on transcript, is, Mr. Chairman, we came here to mine coal, not build houses. Gallagher forced them to build houses and the union forced them to build houses.
And it was to be the first township built on the Bowen Basin.
The houses were very basic. No floor coverings, no cupboards, no nothing. No ceiling fans, no fly screens, nothing. The heat was just unbearable.
While the coal companies built the houses, the miners and their families built the communities.
So what we did, we all chipped in so much a week to build a swimming pool, and it was a full-size Olympic pool.
They decided to build a football grounds then, and they got the machines from the mine.
As the coal rush intensified, more international coal companies moved in. Mindful of the Mara housing disgrace, American Utah agreed to build model towns at Blackwater, Dysart and Moranbah.
To the locals, Moranbah is known as the town of big cars, pregnant women and dogs.
The optimism on the Bowen Basin would prove short-lived. In 1975, 2.5 years after Box Flat, disaster struck again, this time at Mara's Kayanga mine. 13 men had been underground fighting fires when the mine exploded on September the 20th. They were now trapped deep underground.
Some were down the shaft less than half an hour before the blast.
It's only, a week ago since we put out our last one, the big one, big fire.
Was it dangerous as well?
Not as dangerous as this one.
No.
This one's down the bottom, see?
These fellows down there, were they your mates?
My radio, mate.
What do you think of their chances?
No way.
Why not?
That'd be a silly question to ask, wouldn't it, mate? For a start, wouldn't it?
They're bloody dead.
In search of signs of life, boreholes were drilled from the surface, but they revealed a massive underground inferno and toxic gases. Today, the bores can still be found where the men are buried.
And this is a location where we think the men were at the time. And the borehole was sunk here to establish the atmosphere that was down there at that location, to determine if there was any possibility of anyone being alive at the time, and determine for certain just what the atmosphere was like. And that clearly indicated that the amount of carbon monoxide in there, people would not live any more than a few minutes if they'd survived the initial explosion, which there's no way in the world they would have, because there was props, blowing a bloody, half a kilometre away out the portal. There's no way in the world anyone would have survived it. There was 13 men died that day, 13 of them. I knew every one of them. None of those bodies have been recovered. No one. It was just too difficult to get down there. The National Party people turned up, Cram, Minister for Mines, Jelky Peterson, Khan, all the rest of it. And the first thing they came and said, but you know, there wasn't a coal dust explosion and the company, I've forgotten the exact word now, but the company wasn't at fault. I mean, they protected the company straight away. Like, you know, I mean, they didn't even know what happened. I mean, Cran, who was the Minister of Mine, was a pig farmer, never even down a mine.
Mayor Walker was one of the blokes who was killed. He married his girlfriend. They went to school together. Bielka Peterson come to her house. And I'd never seen a woman so devastated as she was. She was helped out of the house to come out the front lawn to shake his hand. I never forget that. Shook his hand and yeah, she was a mess. He got in his car and drove off, driving around in his big Fairlane. And if he felt guilty, mate, he didn't show it.
Like Box Flat, the loss of life was attributed to spontaneous combustion and the presence of gas. Once again, personnel should not have been in the mine.
And it was the same type of incident, spontaneous combustion. Same thing again. There's been recommendation from Box Flat which hadn't been carried out. I don't think any of them been carried out at that particular time. One of the blokes, he was killed years later. His daughter gave me a ring. So I went and saw her, and it was just devastating. Well, this poor girl, she was about 19, I think, at the time, but she said that she didn't really get on with her mother that well, and then she said, you know, she just loved her father, really, you know, loved him so much. They said it was such a big loss for her. And she said, you know, her mother had another partner and that didn't work out very good. So she left home, I think she was about 14, and a bit of a street kid pretty well, you know, and really struggled through life, you know, and what effect that had on her. When I look at this memorial that we built, I see the names on there. I just think, you know, my name should have been on there. I was supposed to stay underground with the deputy, Eric Fletcher, and but I wanted to go home that afternoon, and it was only an hour or so later the mine blew up. Very sad. And, you know, the fact that we done all this, the local fellows here done all this, the company wouldn't do anything. They didn't want this memorial here. We asked them if they'd give us make a brass plaque for us. But they wouldn't do it. They said, oh, there's a bit of a scrap steel up in the workshop. You can have a bit of that if you want to do something. You can grave some of their names on that if you want to. It just brings it home to you again how important, you know, safety in that is in the mine. You know, we've got to make sure this thing never ever happens again.
Accidents of all kinds continued to plague the industry. Miners were being killed and maimed at an alarming rate. Queensland's coalfields were now called the killing fields. By the mid-1970s, over 300 men had lost their lives. Many more suffered horrific injuries.
You've gone and dug a hole underground. Now you've got Mother Nature pushing down on you. You can be drowned, you could be killed with an overpressure event, you could be killed by a gas explosion, and if you're not vigilant all the time, Mother Nature will creep up and give you a kick in the arse.
Alec Moody, he was on contract out there, and he'd just wheeled a wagon in, and a lump fell out of the roof, is what we called them, either turtle backs or a slippery back. You'd get a layer of silt or mud, and it'd form like a dome. And he just wheeled the wagon in, and this lump fell out and fell on him and killed him.
I remember one time I buried a lean horse miner. We'd just taken the last pillar out and it was just a little bit at the end. I thought, I'll get one more car, you know. The deputy was standing beside me, had this massive big prop next to where I was driving, and it just snapped it clean off, beside me. And we were running out, and as we were running out, mate, it was clipping at our heels of rocks, you know, and it was just falling down.
He was on top of the continuous miner when it fell in, and it just pushed him down like a concertina, just followed him down in the heap on the thing. And he never had he had one bit of a gash in his head. That's the only mark you could see on him.
I seen another guy one day, he went over the low wall on a dozer. He rolled 30 metres across the pit floor on the dozer. And when we got down there to get him out, mate, and it was devastating, you know, that sort of poor bastard.
Trevor Domino got killed with a rib fall. Rib fell on him. He had internal injuries, you know, and they got him to hospital and he had a massive heart attack and died, you know. Yeah, good mate. Missed him. You know, I missed him. I actually got him a job in a coal mine, you know.
You know, Vic used to go to work with a man and then come home and say, he's not coming home, he's gone. Which he did. One guy got killed and he went to work with him in the morning and come home and said, why didn't you come home with Jack? And he said, he got killed today. So it was hard, you know, you had to worry.
Despite the risks, the 1970s were a boom time on the Bowen Basin. Exports were growing strongly, jobs were plentiful, and mining communities flourished. But by 1980, change was in the wind. A hostile federal government now targeted the miners' hard-won housing subsidies. It was an ominous sign of things to come.
When we first came, we were living at Blackwater in a company house, which was $5 a week. 3-bedroom house, air conditioning in the main bedroom. And John Howard was treasurer at the time, and he decided that we would have to, on subsidised rentals, you would have to pay $5 a week, and it was worth $100 a week, you would have to pay the tax.
The early indications from the taxation department were that we would be adjudged to have been receiving a benefit of some $85 or $90 a week and therefore paying tax on that money that we weren't receiving. But $85 a week was twice the award rate of pay for coal cutting machinemen in the coal mining industry. You would have almost been working at the mine for nothing.
And our whole Howard thought, we'll hit these blokes, because why should they be paying less rent than a person at the Gold Coast? The thing he didn't realise that it wasn't only the miners, it was police, school teachers, property owners.
At the Utah mines, which I was at, we'd been on strike already for about 6 weeks, getting a better industrial agreement with BHP, and then the so-called, what became known as a tax revolt blew up, and mine workers in Blackwater initiated industrial action.
Jack Dempsey was one of the union reps.
So I pulled the men out of the mine and the open cut. We had a meeting, we walked off the job just after 11.
At the meetings, it was decided, no, we'll fight this. And the question was asked, well, it's the government. How are we going to beat the government? And they said, well, we'll just stick together and we'll beat the government. We've got to win this. So it was just a unanimous vote that we stick together and that's it, we have a go at the government.
As the weeks passed and the strike rolled on, support flowed in from across the country.
We were getting money sent from Tasmania, Western Australia, everywhere. Money was coming in. But no one was given money. We were given vouchers.
Businesses knew that, they knew they were losing money, but they stuck by the miners. You know, they supplied food and everything, you know, and to keep the people going. They were pretty good.
House payments that people had, or car payments, or whatever, furniture, we had all those frozen. We were lucky there. That saved a lot of people.
Morn is digging in for a long struggle. Despite the financial costs, it's still hard to see.
It was now 7 weeks into the strike. Each week cost the coal companies $28 million in lost income, while the government was losing $5 million in corporate taxes. In August 1980, Treasurer John Howard and Deputy Prime Minister Doug Anthony went to Blackwater to argue the point.
The meeting was delayed. Unfortunately, the publican at the time had decided that, 10 or 12 weeks into a strike, he would put on free beer for the masses in the public bar.
There was about 400 people turned up, so everybody into the pub, and everybody's into the beer, and thinking it was the next one's going to be your last, and so they were drinking up pretty heavy.
We knew that the people downstairs in the meeting were rowdy and cranky with the participants upstairs, Doug Anthony and John Howard in particular. The meeting also took a long time because John Howard is a very difficult person to negotiate with and get to see common sense, and he was obstinate.
The meeting lasted hours, but there was no agreement.
And as local delegates, we implored the Treasurer to depart the conference via a set of back stairs. He chose not to accept our advice.
Word come down that they were coming downstairs and we've got nothing. Some were saying, let's string him up, and she was really on.
But it was very terrifying when they went out, I can tell you, because the men were chanting and raving outside.
There must have been 3 or 4 or more hundred people outside.
The union officials, picked men out here and there to come over and sort of hold them back.
He came out this door here. Everybody came from the bar, which, like I said, was about 4 hours drinking. Everybody thought it was going to run out, but so everybody came out of the bar and lined along here, and he was through the crowd. Police sort of had their hands on his shoulders, moving him through the crowd, and they were jostling at him and carrying on. And I stand back and I said, "You're going to get him, get him." And I just run through, sort of half tackled him, pulled him down to the ground, put him in a headlock.
I don't know how many coppers were hanging off him, but I would have loved to be there to give him a hand.
It was the miners who got him out of the headlock. Miners put him in the headlock, miners got him out of the headlock. It wasn't his own security people.
Anyhow, they finally got him into his car, and people were kicking at it. The terrified look, I can remember the look on his face. He was a terrified look. He thought he was gone.
The end result was that we forced a back down by the Fraser-Howard government. I don't think John Howard ever forgave coal miners for that crushing defeat.
It was reasonably hard, but without the women's support and behind us, we probably would never have won that dispute.
I mean, it was for a good cause, and I just went along with it, and I supported Vic every inch of the way, and that was it. You had to.
The women had always been the bedrock of the miners' industrial strength. Now, the union pushed to have women employed in the mines.
I'm one of those people who believe that anybody can do a job should get a job. We put it onto the company to employ women. So the first women to be employed in the industry in Queensland, of course, was at Mara.
In 1979, Col Ryan saw an ad in the local newspaper. He encouraged his daughter, Patty, to apply.
I'd grown up in a coal mining family. My dad was an underground miner, and that's what I heard about all the time at the tea table, is this and that about coal mines. So I thought, I'll give it a go, Then I got the job, and I remember Dad was overjoyed. He thought it was great, My daughter's getting a job at the mines before my son gets to start. So my brother was a year younger, so
Well, there was Rayleigh, Laurel and Patty. We all started at the same time, so it was quite a big deal, actually. The Courier Mail came up, took our photos and everything like that.
It was exciting when we first started. It was a bit daunting too, because we knew we were the first, and I think we knew we were sort of paving a way. But there was only the 4 of us, and there was all those blokes.
Sexist comments and things like that probably got bandied around a bit and things like that. But at the time, it was just, you just accepted it because it was the bloke's world, and
I mean, I only left the industry 2 years ago, and I still had that comment thrown at me that this is no place for women. You have to fall back on the union support. at those times, to sort of try and sort this out. Say, look, she's just here trying to earn a wage too.
We did create history. We are part of history with that. So, and when you think about all the women that are in the industry today, with us, just the four of us initially, it's really exciting. Oh.
While great strides were being made in wages and conditions on the surface, underground, change was more difficult. On the morning of July 16th, 1986, disaster once again struck at Mara. This time, an explosion in the number 4 tunnel. While 7 men staggered out of the mine, another 12 were still trapped deep underground. Jimmy Parsons was part of the rescue brigade called in to investigate what was thought to be just a rockfall.
We all took our seats and got in the Rover and proceeded to go down the mine. It got that dark and that much coal dust, we couldn't see where we were going. And the under manager and Steve Byron advanced a bit further, and if they got any further than 3 or 4 feet in front of you, you couldn't see them. You had to yell out to each other to keep in contact. So we got that bad that we stopped and got our seats on.
As they moved deeper into the mine, evidence of an explosion was all around.
We found tyres 600 feet up the tunnel. We seen a transformer which weighs about 20 tonne, and all the cables that were out were just like guitar strings. And a helmet melted on a water pipe. Mine Raver was pushed up against the corner, all twisted.
The smell, devastation you could see around you was pretty shocking. We had what they call solid crib tables. They were, the steel stayed there, but the timber that was on them, it disappeared. It was blown all over the place.
Yeah, I was in the first team that went in and we couldn't get to where it was. And after that, we just come back up and they decided again that they just go down, take a couple of teams down later on and work our way into them.
Each rescue attempt was met with poor visibility and toxic gas.
There was a team went out on a Friday night, 2 days after it, and they found all the bodies. When we got down there, we got to 100 feet off them. But, we couldn't go any further, that was it. And, we knew they were there, and there was never any hope for them of being alive. The Blackwater team said they would go down and bag all the bodies, because they said they didn't want us going down because we knew everyone that was down there.
Blackwater Mines Rescue put the bodies in the bags and we just give them a hand to get them out. But once we started, a couple of blokes or 4 blokes onto a body bag, you could work out who they were because of the weight and the size of, because they weren't all the same build.
I think about 5 hours it took us to get the 13 people out, but I think it was a great relief to everyone because that they did get them out.
The union officials probably did a fairly good job. They had a pretty hard job to go around to people's places and, tell people that they've lost loved ones. So they probably copped a lot of flack, and it did get angry at different stages.
It was tough telling people ultimately there was no prospect of the men being alive because of the intensity of the explosion and the amount of noxious gas that remained in the mine, and it took a bit of a toll on me personally. Not as much as on the families of the men involved, of course.
Media was running rampant around the place. There was a bloke even arrested dressed up as a miner trying to get on the site.
The widows, they were getting the door knocked on at 12 o'clock at night, coming out and there's cameras pointing at them and flashlights on them. Have you heard any news?
There have been people who've been standing outside the doorways of people's homes whose husbands or sons are trapped in that mine, and that's disgusting. It was tough and difficult dealing with the media, who were appalling in their approach and their invasion of families.
Even when they had the memorial service, I was there and they had the bloody plane was flying around buzzing when the priest saying his prayers, and the plane kept buzzing around the thing, and the next thing the copper at the time went over on the UHF and pissed him off.
My nephew Brent, he got killed in number 4 explosion. He was 18-year-old when he got killed, and that was my brother's only son. He'll never get over it. It was sad, very sad. But all the rest of the lads, we knew them all. And you know, all their families and the kids, you know, it's really tragic. I still get chills from it.
Marrying before, in many respects, was an accident. Even though they were doing the wrong thing at the time, they were extracting not according to the plan. And I'd had words with management over that. And eventually that's what it caused the explosion, but I don't think anyone would have expected an explosion to be caused by a roof fall. So, in many respects, Mountain before, you could say, was an accident.
It was Mara's second major disaster. Queensland was now ground zero for mines rescue training.
We changed our thinking as far as mines rescue is concerned, you know. It also helped us find where these special people are. And all you do is find them and train them. The first mines rescue team in Queensland happened in Ipswich, and the training we used to do up there was very real. This is the fire gallery. This is the Blackwater Rescue Station. This was built around about 1975. This is where we did our fire training, our hot and humid training for our rescue blokes. We used to light this fire, get it and full of smoke. And these old structures here, that's the old simulated timber supports that we had in the mines years ago. Unless we've actually practiced it and experienced it, we're not going to handle it as well, even though we call this peacetime training. And we demonstrate we can do that in a hostile atmosphere. This here would probably have 300 or 400 parts per million of CO. Probably be as hot as 35, 38, 40, 45 degrees C. We train under arduous conditions, but what we can't add to that is the trauma and the stressful psychology of it all. But what we can do, we can prepare them as well as we can psychologically to handle the atmosphere, but also to have confidence in themselves and also confidence in the equipment that they're wearing.
Despite the emphasis on mine safety, just 8 years later, in 1994, trouble was again brewing at Mara. The number 2 mine was experiencing elevated gas readings.
Coal at Mara was very suspect to spontaneous combustion. And I remember one Saturday afternoon they called me in that they had emissions of carbon monoxide going through their meters. I went out there. Yeah, took the readings. She was heating very quick. So we got the men in, sealed the whole area off and that. Had the mines inspector out and I said, well look, isn't it only right that we should shut the mine till it goes through the incubation period? He agreed with that, so we signed an agreement. No one was to go down the pit until after it went through that period. I remember one time with that first heating we had, my son was there. What I didn't like about that, I told him later. I said, look mate, I said, I don't want us both down the mine at the same time. You're my only son, and if both of them had gone at once, you got 3 sisters and a mother to think of.
It was night shift on Sunday, August the 7th.
Went out to make a cup of coffee because the coffee urn was there beside the chromatograph and that they'd had set up in the gas monitoring room. And as I filled it up, my thermos up, there was the screen reading out, and it was flashing red, and it was the methane level was 6-point-something%. And I said to the old John Owens, the bloke beside me, I said, I don't think we should be going down here. I said, it's in the explosive range already. And yet nobody seemed to take any notice, nobody wanted to listen. I thought, well, they must all think everything's there. So I just followed them and got into the Rover and went down.
Jimmy and his crew travelled a kilometre underground to repair a burst water hose.
And I was on top of the miner with one of the mechanics, and we're trying to pull this hose out, and the other fitter was down the other side wiggling the hose, and all of a sudden we heard this big movement of air,
At 11:35 p.m, the mine exploded. 21 men were underground in different sections of the mine.
And it just rattled and rattled and rattled and rattled. Like if it started, the roof started falling from the surface, and it got louder and louder as it got down. It looked like if the whole mine was caving in.
I'm not sure whether Jimmy got up to move or run, but in my mind I seen Jimmy and my younger brother being tossed in the air.
A couple of the other fellas didn't know what was going on. They said to Jimmy, "What's going on?" Felt like a roof fall. Jimmy said, "No, it's been an explosion by the feel of it." Then we could start smelling the smoke and dust, and just couldn't see anything for quite a long time.
It was the third major disaster in Moura in just 20 years. Given the extent of the explosion, the men would have to save themselves. Jimmy drew on his mine's rescue training. The mine filled with gas and smoke. Visibility was almost zero.
The under-manager got on the phone and wanted to know, are we coming out of the pit? And the deputy, we had what's called a party line. He was another couple of what we call pillars away, and he got on the phone, he said, "Yes, we are coming out, we are driving out." So they knew that we were okay at that stage, but they knew the other panel was in strife.
Got our self-rescuers out and putting them on, and China had a bit of problem with these. He was starting to panic, we couldn't get the thing out, so I took it off him and pulled the clip, an extra clip, and pulled it out for him, and he was right then.
And it took me a little while. Jimmy ended up opening the rescue up and I got it on.
They say them self-rescuers are for 50 minutes, I think. But if you've got to walk and you're under exertion, I'd say they'd be flat out keeping you alive for 30 minutes.
Also, they get very hot when you're breathing into them. Normally it burns your mouth. And if you're in contaminated atmosphere, because we were driving out, we weren't doing a lot of exertion.
Luckily we had 2 PJBs in there. We had one and the fitters come in one. And some climbed in the fitters one and we got into another one and tried to get our way out.
And on the way out we got lost a bit because you could only just see in front of your hand with your cap lamp. You couldn't see any further.
I thought, well, this is it. We're not going to get out of this because we can't find our way. So they backed up a little bit and got back in the Rover and sat down, and I said, well, I won't see the missus, the wife and the kids anymore. Because we're not,
It was very dusty, and Jimmy Parsons got out of the PJB, walked beside it, feeling for the high tension cable on the roof.
We were just going from side to side where we'd see a bit of white with the bounce off the wall a bit. We still had probably 30 odd cut-throughs to go to reach the surface, so that's another 3,000 feet.
Nearing the surface, visibility suddenly improves, allowing them to pick up speed. They reach the surface with just minutes left in their self-rescuers.
I wasn't sure whether I was going to seek him again, and then once we got to the surface, everything was okay because we knew we were out of the danger.
Workers 2 kilometres away say they felt shockwaves from the explosion.
When I got to the mine, and to be honest with you, I was it was a miraculous thing that escaped for them because they were, quite a deep part of the mine. Some people played a very good role. One of them was a very good friend of mine, Jimmy Parsons, I know played a very good role.
Without him, I'd suggest they're dead. And when they come out, they were dragging each other and I'd say, and another short distance, 50 metres, they wouldn't get out.
And we were just lucky there wasn't a secondary explosion. Like if we had a secondary dust explosion, nobody would have got out of it.
But 11 of their mates were still trapped below.
All entrances to the mine were blocked as rescue teams worked to assess the best way to reach their workmates.
I would suggest that it's an extremely serious situation with regards to those employees that are underground.
When I got to the mine after the explosion, the first thing I said, well, what were the readings in the sealed area? And they showed me. I said, well, what about the sample? Did they put a sample through the chromatograph? No. They put a sample through the chromatograph. I couldn't believe it. That's what we had it for.
To give gas readings in the mine, they had tubes running everywhere in every section, and they could give a gas reading and that, and As you walked out the bathroom, it had a TV screen up there, and it could tell you the gas levels and everything in those sections, and yet they never, what the readings they were getting off them, they took no notice of them the night that they went down below for the last explosion.
They even had alarms which go off once the methane or carbon oxides and that reach a certain level. And the alarms were going off and they defeated the alarm. And they said they defeated because they didn't want to, worry the blokes. Well, the blokes would have been worried. The alarms have been going off. Again, what's going on?
Yeah, we shouldn't have been in there. Wasn't long after we started that it blew up. So, yeah, not real happy about that. No.
One of the missing men was a member of Peter Ian's family.
Michael Ryan, he's my brother-in-law. He's still down there, so.
Michael Ryan's sister Patty was at home asleep.
I got woken up. My sister rang me, but I couldn't understand what she was saying to me because I've sleep fogged, and not really awake. But she was crying hysterically on the phone, and it turned out what she was trying to say to me was that he didn't get out. And I ran down to her place to see what was wrong. And that's when she said to me, she said her husband, Peter, he had gotten out and he had rang her, and that's all that he had said to her was that he'd gotten out, but Michael was still down there, but they wouldn't let him go back down to get Michael.
I jumped in the car and I drove and I pulled up at Marigay. They had the mine closed down. I pulled up at the gates there, and of course the men knew me because I used to work at Mara that long. And they said, "No, Cole, you can't come in." And I said, "Well, can you tell me the situation?" And they said, "We have no word. Well, are the men still down there?" And they said, "As far as we know." So I knew then there was very little hope, because our self-rescue has only lasted 20 minutes. Had time to get out. But I heard some of the others did get out in time, another area, but you still lived on hope that they were in a pocket of air or something.
My wife and sister-in-law and Cole Ryan are all here by the time I come home from work. Yeah, crying and hugging each other, and yeah. I can remember Cole patting me on the back and saying, "Thank Christ we got one of yous," but could have lost the both of yous. So.
2 days later, a second explosion sealed the fate of the men below. There was now no hope of reaching them alive.
We knew then that the whole town was shocked because it was the third explosion. We'd lost men in Mara. Kayanga first, 13 men. Number 4 mine, 12 men. Number 2 mine, another 11 men.
Because the mine was on fire extensively, they end up making the decision to push the portals in, bury them with spoil, probably never to be reopened again.
There was a hell of a lot of anger around here, mate, I'll tell you that. And a lot of people were blaming us because we didn't get them out earlier, Like I said, I only went down to the pub and I had one beer one day and somebody had a dig at me, so I just drank that and I went home and I never went out again.
Look how much better off Jimmy Parsons would have been that night had the other guys with him been trained. Had they been trained to the same level as him, the same level of understanding.
A couple of good strong men who kept their cool and knew what had to be done to get out of that mine alive. They saved the lives of other people.
I wasn't able to go and do at Mara what I'd done with the previous explosion. I was still scarred emotionally from what I'd been through with the previous explosion. And I didn't realise how much I'd been scarred until I actually got the phone call and said that there'd been another one at the bastard of a place.
In the inquiry into it, what came out of it was the judge said the only thing you've got right here was the time it was to blow its lid and the men were down below.
My father went to quite a bit of the inquiry because he wanted some answers. His only son.
It was brought up earlier when I went to the inquiry, the under manager on shift, he said, well, what'll I tell the men? And the superintendent said, if they don't ask, don't tell them anything.
It came out in the inquiry that the managers of the underground were told that if the boys asked too many questions, keep them up top and have safety meetings all night. If they don't ask enough questions, send them down, get them producing.
And at the time, there was a lot of pressure on, keep the mine open, because, coal prices were down and, there were people worried the mine might close and all the rest of it.
No, they should not have been. It was just, production first.
You felt like there was negligence on the part of the company, that you're just numbers, you're replaceable. But if we were more than well aware of that, anyone that worked at Mara was already aware of that was the company's stance. We'd been through this twice before already.
They knew they were going to get out of it, because I said to the superintendent of the mine at the time, why were them men down the pit there? And I said, you know why. And he said, well, sue us if we're found guilty. And this was before the inquiry. I knew then, they knew they were getting straight out of this. The usual thing. They knew they had a lot of covering up to do. They made sure they didn't retrieve the bodies. No, there were no way in the world they wanted anyone down that mine to see what had happened, where they'd made the boo-boos. But it was a big hurt when they could have settled it down and got them bodies so we could give our families a proper funeral, the respect.
No one got charged or nothing, no. Which they should have been. And none of us were happy. All, pretty hostile in the town for a long time. And,
We got the union officials to organise a meeting with the Attorney General, State Attorney General of Queensland, to talk about the possibility of prosecutions. Minister was very sympathetic, actually, very sympathetic to us. But he said, look, the reality is this. If we're going to pull on BHP, it's going to cost millions of dollars, because they will throw unlimited amounts of money at it. They're the best lawyers in the country. He said, and the chances of a prosecution will be almost zero.
A memorial now marks the place where the men are buried.
To see at least they've left this strip alone still. They've been as good as their word on that.
We couldn't find it, me and Clarkie.
It's hard enough going to the Rotunda once a year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can understand that.
Just tears your heart. Yeah. And they said to me one day, oh, you should be over it by now. I said, you never get over it.
No.
G'day, boys.
It's hard to go back out there all the time and see that monument there and all the memorials and read the ages of some of them and think it shouldn't have happened. There shouldn't be anything out there.
Dear, oh dear. No, dear. Where's the time going?
Still like yesterday. Good to see you, boys.
Come on, Jim. All right, come on.
Come on, Jim.
I can only go there once a year because it's about all that I can take of that, to go there. It's just too distressing. I mean, I knew every one of those blokes except the contractor. So it was hard, not just lose my brother, but lose a lot of people that you know.
When I went back the other day, I just relived how I felt the first time. You don't get over it.
The trauma for the families didn't end there. Years later, the new mine owners made plans to mine the gravesite for coal.
The company wanted to mine over the top of where the men were. And I was very upset about that.
They said, oh, they want to start mining through there. So I thought there was a special reserve on that. I said, oh no, that was so long ago now, you should be over that by now, it's all right. And they could not understand what we were getting so upset about. I explained to one of the engineers, I said, you know, do you have loved ones who have passed over? And she said, yes. And I said, are they buried in a cemetery? Or she said, yes. I said, well, how would you feel if I worked for a turf company? I came in there and said, oh, we want to take the turf off the top of the graves. Yeah, it's really good turf. We want to use it elsewhere. We want to take it up there. She said, you can't do that. It's a cemetery. I said, yeah, exactly. I know that all the unions ganged up and did say to the company that they would take some action over it if the company proceeded. We didn't want that disturbed, full stop.
We've had all these fatalities here, and no one has ever been prosecuted. No one has even been fined $10.
The hardening attitude toward mine workers coincided with the election of the Howard government in 1996. 16 years after the housing tax revolt, John Howard was now Prime Minister of Australia.
Some of the biggest disputes in Australia's history took place while John Howard was Prime Minister, and he kept grinding away at the trade union movement.
The first target would be the American-owned Gordonstone mine near Emerald. In October 1997, the company sacked 312 miners, all union members. Anne O'Leary's late husband, John, was a union leader at the mine.
When John Howard took over government, I think maybe that is just what they had been waiting for. That gave them the ability to put their plan into action. Yeah, they were the best coal miners in the world at one stage. It was the highest producing. They actually built a statue to the miners. Don't know whatever happened to that statue. It's probably buried out on the site there somewhere.
A picket line was set up at the mine gates.
This is the road that takes you into the old Gordonstone mine. The picket line was on this road here. This area all through here. That's where we had when the men slept, we had our campfire, another donga where we ate. You got cold out here at winters nights, hot in summertime, you get down to 0 degrees here, go well over 100 degrees. I was here for about a year. Some of the boys stayed the full nearly 2 years.
To sit on a picket line in the middle of nowhere, I mean, it's virtually central Queensland, sort of semi-desert area out there. They showed incredible stamina. It was incredible. It really, really showed the true grit of the character of, it made me proud to be an Australian.
Every morning when the buses come through, full of scabs, the boys would beat the drums, and blokes would get arrested. There's heaps of blokes arrested on this line here. Once you're arrested once, you're told not to go get arrested twice. You're looking at jail time if you did. But there's many more buses to come after that.
The company then hired security guards to harass the miners and their families.
It was very intimidating to have these blokes in cars crawling along the street next to your daughter, They carried concealed weapons. They all had those little bags around their waist, and that's what the guns were in. The gun shop owner was furious about it. He spoke out a lot about it to anyone who would listen. He said, believe me, the sort of guns they're carrying would make a mess of you. They don't just put a hole in, they'd blow your head off.
These cars over here, they're turning up now, watching us.
Probably doesn't surprise me, probably their security. I don't know. But, it's free land. Australia's a free country. They don't own the land here. This is a memorial wall the comrades of the Gordonstone Lodge built here as a monument for the struggle we had, the picket line here, which went nearly 2 years. It's a monument now to basically workers' rights and workers' solidarity. Different unions in Australia come and support us, you know, on this picket line over the 2 years. You know, you have the MUA, our friends the MUA, you know, come up in droves many a time, you know. They come up by busloads. And, you know, we had international guests, you know, from America, from England, you know, from New Zealand, you know.
The union eventually won the unfair dismissal case in court. But rather than give the men their jobs back, the company sold the mine.
Gordonstone no longer existed, so the guys couldn't get their jobs back. But nowadays, in Australia, the actual unfair dismissal case is taught through Australian law because it was such a monumental case. So it was well and truly worthwhile sticking it out to the end. But there's such a terrible creeping in of an Americanisation of our workforce that I really hate, and I think that if we hadn't stuck to that picket line, that would have marked the real end of an era in the Australian workforce, and I mean which would have tied in very well with what John Howard was working towards, you know, putting a great divide between the boss and the worker.
It was a hard struggle, but, you know, the struggle had to be fought. If we would have just rolled over and let them get away with sacking us, how many other companies would have done it to their workers?
Across at Rio Tinto's Blair Atoll mine, the campaign against the union continued. In July 1998, the company dismissed 16 union members for refusing to sign an individual agreement.
Rio and the Howard government wanted to change the IR of Australia, and we were one place that they selected, and things changed, and the ones they thought that they could keep on individual contracts, they put onto them, and those that couldn't, they removed because we're all in the union.
Gary Mannion remembers how the company victimised the men.
They decided to give them jobs painting the tyres with a 2-inch paintbrush. The whole idea was to turn around and upset them enough that they could turn around and wouldn't be able to put up with it. And the first week they did get rid of one of the people.
It tried to belittle people, and at the very beginning they had people working out in the hot sun with hose, chipping weeds, little brushes, painting tyres. They tried to intimidate people.
And the whole idea was to turn around and disperse us and get us out of town, so we'd have less fight in us. And it just never ever happened because everybody stuck together.
We were local people. We grew up in the town. We lived here. And I think that is one of the things that kept us all together.
In the court case, they turned around and found lists of people in the maintenance manager's book. He actually wrote that there is a blacklist of people, and he wrote their names down.
After 6 years in the courts, in July 2003, a final decision was handed down.
The moment came of truth, and when it was read out, all 16 to be reinstated to a position not less favourably held, we knew then that we had won the case collectively, and you sort of felt, well, all that hard work paid off. It was knowledge gained, it was experience, and even for the union, it was something that was successful, and we all learned something out of it, so that when we're confronted with it again, we sort of have a knowledge of what we may need.
There is no possible way in the world that we could have ever even thought about fighting it without the backing of the union.
It was the longest unfair dismissal case in Australian history. Despite the victory, mine workers now faced a wider attack on their conditions. The companies introduced fly-in, fly-out workers and 12-hour shifts, a far cry from the 7 or 8-hour shifts that miners had enjoyed for decades.
Today's miners enjoy good wages and conditions. Miners work a 35-hour week, usually 5 days of 7 hours. The time is measured from when the men leave the surface until they return.
The impact on coal communities of fly-in, fly-out, or FIFO, has been severe.
Where you work 8-hour shift, you went to work, you done your work, you went home. Not now. You get off the bus or whatever, fly out, everyone goes different directions.
The wives don't see their husbands for a week, like my son. He goes up and he has a week on and a week off, and he flies in and out, but it's hard because she's down here working with children, his wife, and he comes home for a week and then he has to go back again.
It's not designed for families. That's not the push. Push is about the maximum dollar and smaller outlay. That's what it's about.
Yeah, the push is obviously for an itinerant workforce. Someone who's away from their family for long periods of time is more compliant. You're not going to raise an issue if you're going back to a company-controlled camp that night after your shift. You simply want to get in, and be it safe or not, you simply want to get in, do your work and get out again.
For Moranbah mining families like the Jameses and the Earls, concerns are growing about the future of their community.
Doing a fly-in, fly-out, drive out, being away on your days off, we can go fishing or whatever. If we want to, and it's not, we're not leaving the family behind for a week.
Not as big an issue.
Yeah. No.
Because we've been coming home every day anyway from work. It makes it a little bit easier.
They don't want the communities in the town because then they have to pay for more infrastructure. They need to maintain schools and the hospitals and the shopping centres, and they don't want to do that. It's much better if it's just a massive camp where they don't have to have anything to do with it.
They could control people more.
Yeah.
The companies want it to be outside people that don't know about the unions and don't know.
They've got no education on it or anything like that.
We won't forget where our rights came from. They're things that everyone the union has fought for and given. Like, it's not something that's just come easy and everything you want.
To the industry, I seen the thing the other day, it said unions is like tradition. It does get passed along through the family. So people who are coming into this who don't know it, don't know it.
Yeah.
We have companies deliberately destroying the fabric of those mining communities, and part of it, and not a small part of it in my view, is an overarching industrial relations context where they know the militancy and the history of those mining communities when they were residential towns, and they're trying to destroy that.
What is happening has to do with an aim that coal companies have had since the darkest early days of Ipswich and the darkest early days of convict mining in the 1800s. The aim is really simple, is to have a cheap and compliant workforce.
The pressures on workers reached a flashpoint in 2011. 4,000 coal miners were in dispute with BHP over a range of issues, including FIFO.
In BHP's own words, it was a fight they said they had to have. And included in that fight was where they wanted to divide families. They wanted to, in my view, divide the community. It was ideologically driven from the start. They spent in excess of $2 billion fighting the union. But when they were fighting the union, they weren't just fighting the members, they were fighting their families in the communities they live in.
Not satisfied with 12-hour shifts, the company now wanted shifts up to 15 hours long.
And they just wanted more. You just couldn't satisfy them. There's just nothing we could do. If they saw 20 million, well, they wanted to make 25. You could not satisfy their greed. They just simply wanted more.
The dispute lasted 18 months and cost the company $2 billion, the most expensive dispute on the Queensland coalfields.
Ended up costing them about $2.5 billion to try and break us. Obviously we didn't get all we wanted, but the important thing was they didn't get what they wanted. We held the line and we didn't lose what they were originally trying to take off us, which is what it amounted to in the end, that we hoped to gain a few things, and in the end it just became a matter of survival and just holding our ground, which we did.
Coal communities themselves are now under threat. In Collinsville, the new mine operator has sacked the workforce.
Glencore have just shut up shop, shut the mine. They've come in, shut the gates, and they don't care about anyone in the community. That's exactly what they want to do.
There's about 160 houses empty in this town at the moment.
People don't want to live here if there's no jobs available to them, which is understandable. Other people say that they don't want to live here because of the way that the town is falling away.
Families that have been in Collinsville for generations are now being forced out.
I'm a fifth generation to live here in Collinsville. My son and my daughter are sixth generation. My grandchildren are seventh generation. My son was actually a fifth generation to work here at the Collinsville coal mine. He was made redundant at the end of August. Brent has been lucky enough to pick up work at another coal mine, which is nearly 2 hours away, leaving his partner and his 2 little babies behind.
I just can't get my head around the situation where we have a mining company that had a workforce there with the expertise, the skills, the loyalty, and the only mistake that these workers have made is that they were employed when this new company came in. You hear government talking about moving people out of southeast Queensland into regional Queensland, and yet they're allowing mining companies to have these policies where the employment policy is you must live in a mining camp.
If we don't do our history, then we leave somebody else.
Digger Murphy and Stephen Smythe, the current Miners' Union president, are paying a visit to a mine site near Ipswich.
Yeah, Rusty. There you go, mate. Hey, mate. Digger Murphy.
How you
Rusty,
going,
the
Digger?
Lodge president.
Nice to meet you, mate.
Digger, we're here doing a documentary. Digger's, was a long-serving president prior to the amalgamation. A lot of history there. Started in the mines when he was 15 in 1935 in the Ipswich fields, pick and shovel. So,
in the old days.
Yeah, and obviously from the current generation, we've got a lot to thank Digger and his comrades for.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, we're just actually going through our EBA at the moment, and a lot of the old things that we lost, I think we're going to be trying to get back, but yeah, just going in for the battle, see what happens.
And it's always been a battle, believe me.
Usually is.
Yeah.
You guys been here a long time, Rusty?
Yeah, I've been here 27. I think Pug's been 30.
Yep.
So this bloke here's old man, well, sadly got killed at Box Flat actually. So he's been around.
Yep.
Bill's been around a long time, and well, these two too.
I must say, I started in 1970 in the mines at Rosewood, and I heard your name around then.
Really?
Yeah. And I can still hear it today, so that's since 1970. So.
But probably thanks to you, we've probably got most of the conditions we got now anyway.
Oh, well,
thanks to
I
you, boy.
followed on from the earlier blokes, you know.
Yep.
People like Digger Murphy stand for what the union's about. He's left a good legacy for us that come after him to continue to ensure that we don't give away what guys like Digger fought for in the past, and the members, the rank and file members, who in the past have got us to a position where we're at.
I think if it wasn't for the union and the safety conditions that we had and having good officials and good check inspectors and that there'd have been a lot more fatalities in the mining.
Like they always condemned the unions, but that was the only thing we had against the bosses, was the union. Yeah? Without the union support, we'd have had nothing.
Because they don't want unions nowadays, and they've whitewashed the public into thinking that they're the real baddies.
You had to fight for what you got, otherwise we wouldn't have got anything.
Well, that's the only way we could hold our conditions. Gain anything, is if we unite.
Bluey Peterson is on his way to the Collinsville Memorial Service. Each year, people come from far and wide to pay their respects to those lost in Queensland coal mines. He'll meet up with his son and grandson and connect with the father that he never knew.
We're gathered here today, as we have done for many years and will continue to do well into the future, to pay our respects to those miners who've paid the ultimate price for the production of coal on these fields. Neither politicians nor companies claim credit for the safety and standards and regulations that are in place in our coal industry today. These standards are a direct result of both industrial and political pressure brought to bear by mine workers, their families and their representatives. All mine workers know that we need to protect the standards in these industries, not only for those who work in the industry today, but those who follow in the future. So as the bell tolls and the names of those who have been lost are read out again as we gathered here today, Let us reaffirm our commitment to ensure that every mine worker is able to return home at the end of each shift to their loved ones. Herbert Smithson, 29th of the 6th, 1942. Pete Miller, 13th of the 10th, 1954. Henry Peterson, 13th of the 10th, 1954.
It's a working man I am, and I've been down underground, and I swear to God if I ever see the sun, or for any length of time, I can hold it in my mind. I never again will go down underground.
Of course, there's a fair bit of camaraderie in there, you know, everybody looked after each other. Of course, you had to, and down there, you know, everybody looked after somebody's back if he wasn't looking. And
we weren't mates just underground. We were mates when we come out from underground.
Mateship was everything. You played football with them, eh? A lot of them?
You know, I had a lot of support from the rank and file, the workers, my workers around me.
You had to rely on everybody else. They had to rely on you.
I'm very proud to call myself a coal miner. That's my profession. And so are my 5 boys and grandson.